Here I be, Doug Proper.
How you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Can we talk about the red suit?
Absolutely. Love that suit.
We don't have to talk about the red suit, but it's
I,
fabulous.
I love that suit. I bought it off eBay in like 2006 and got it tailored maybe 10 years ago. And I I used to always wear the vest on stage with my band. And once in a while, when I'm feeling saucy, I'll put the whole thing on and grab my ridiculous cane and walk around. But I had those pictures taken because I showed up on Halloween wearing the suit, and they were like, "Well, we have to take pictures of you."
Well,
All right.
it's definitely befitting the name of the place where you work, which is Guitar Czar, because
Yeah,
you look like it when you're wearing that suit.
for sure. Yeah.
So, I want to start by talking about you and
Yeah.
your background. You and I first connected a little over a year ago, year and a few months ago, when you reached out to me to talk about the situation you found yourself in, which we'll talk about in a minute. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Um, you, how long you been doing this?
Professionally since 2010.
Okay, and what preceded that? How did you get into this?
Like a lot of folks, I was definitely just the type that was taking my guitars apart. I watched my older brother take his guitars apart and felt like I could do it too, and eventually learned how to put them back together as well. Uh, and then in 2009, I went to the Roberto Venn School of Looth down in Phoenix.
Okay, so
So that was really jumping off point.
what led you to choosing that path to go into school for this?
Funny enough, it was it was actually the result of a family friend of mine is a he's like the only amp repair guy in Salt Lake and has been for decades. And I went into his shop and I was looking around and I was like, Mike, if you shut the doors down and didn't let anyone bring anything in, how long would you be able to work just and until you ran out of things to do? And he said probably 6 months. And I was like, that's great job security. This was 2009 and things were kind of looking a little scary. So I started looking for places to learn how to repair amps. And other than going to like actual college, there wasn't really a lot of options out there for me. But I found that Roberto Venn down in Phoenix had an amp making course. But in order to take that, you had to take the guitar building course. And that was kind of the
Oh,
first time
that was a prerequisite.
yeah, that was the first time I found out that there were guitar building schools you could go to. So I signed up for that and went down there, and that the rest is history, pretty much.
Did you ever take the amp course?
No, I couldn't afford it. I was so poor when I was at school that it was literal rice and beans for me. And in fact, my shoes would get holes in them. I just had these cheap like Walmart slip-ons, and about every week and a half, I would cut out a new insole from cardboard and put that into my shoes. And thankfully, it didn't rain much in Phoenix, so didn't hit.
So you were at Roberto Venn, and you went through the program there. I'm not familiar enough with the program to know what kind of
Yeah.
stuff they put you through and how long it is. I'm not that familiar.
Yeah. So the main course that they teach is a 6 month course, and in order to graduate from that course, you have to build a acoustic guitar and an electric guitar. Back in the days that I went there, you built the acoustic according to plans, which were basically Martin
Mhm.
designs. You could do an OM or a dreadnought, and then the electric, you designed your own body, and you got to pick what type of neck joint you wanted, whether it was a Gibson style neck joint, a PRS style short tenon neck joint, or bolt on neck joint. And so that was nice. There was there were still options, even though you were very much on rails. And then the plan was always that after you completed your two guitars, you would go through some semblance of a repair course. Not everyone got to that point, because if you didn't get your guitars done in time, then you're kind of out of luck. But the requirement for you to graduate was to complete an acoustic and an electric.
Okay. So at what point throughout the process of doing that course did you decide that this was the path that you wanted to do, rather than get into the amp thing?
The first day.
Oh, really? Okay. So it was
Absolutely. I'll know the first day was miserable. Okay, so our first day, it was like August 28th of 2009, and it was 118 degrees. And the work area at the old school, they're in a new facility now, but at the old school, the work area where all the machines were outdoors, and the area where you sat, where your bench was basically in a tin shed. So you were subject to the heat. It also happens to be super windy that day. And the thing that they had us doing our first day was thickness sanding our fingerboards for our acoustics, which were ebony. And the wind was just howling through these work areas, blowing up this black dust, which was just covering everyone in ebony dust. So everybody looked like coal miners by the end of the day. It was 118 degrees. I was pouring sweat. I do not handle heat very well. And I got home at the end of the day and just peeled all my clothes off and laid on the tile floor in my kitchen and had two simultaneous thoughts of, like, in one hand, I was like, what on earth have I gotten myself into? This seems like a really bad idea. And in the other hand, I was like, I cannot wait to find out what I have to do tomorrow.
Oh, wow. So it was just the conditions that were giving you a hassle.
Phoenix shouldn't exist. Phoenix is Los Angeles. Phoenix is Los Angeles without the ocean, so there's virtually no redeeming factors.
Wow. So when you were going through the program, while we were talking the other day, it dawned on me that how people learn the craft nowadays, or within the last 15 or 20 years, because you're sneaking up on 15 years of doing this.
Yeah.
Is a lot different than when some of us came up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, there were schools around then, and Roberto Venn, I think, was around since the early 90s, so somewhere in the 90s, and the guitar program was there, but they were not as ubiquitous as they are today. I mean, back then you had to find somebody to get under their wing and take an apprenticeship, or beg somebody to sit in the corner of the shop and sweep up after them. So I think that the whole school thing is really, within the last 20 years, kind of become the way that people get into this business. I think probably for the better in a lot of ways, because I think the seemingly back when I was starting, and it was certainly for me, the bar of entry into doing this kind of work was extremely low. A screwdriver in hand and a successful swap on a set of tuners on a Strat, and you managed to screw the neck back on facing in the right direction. You were hanging out a shingle for come bring your guitar to me. But so I think the whole process of going to a school is certainly a step in the right direction for a lot of folks, and it seems to be the way that people get into doing this vocationally. When you were at school, where in the whole process did you decide that the repair thing was your thing and not building?
It sort of happened organically, really. The way that the school functioned back in those days was, after the first quarter, They would sort of assess where everyone was, and if you had reached a certain threshold, they would allow you the license to go and build a third instrument that you could do whatever you wanted with. You could build anything you wanted because that was, your extra thing to do. I was so poor that I could not afford to buy any materials. I couldn't buy anything beyond what I had already purchased for the guitars I was making. So I just didn't have the option to build. So I was left with just a little bit of free time every day with nothing to do. And so I would go to instructors and ask them, hey, I've got nothing going on. What can I do? And at first they were handing me books and I was reading through books, sometimes on construction, sometimes on repair. And then as time went on and I had read a bunch of the books, I needed more things to do. I just started kind of shadowing some of the instructors. And I got pretty lucky that I got to sit with John Reuter and watch him do neck resets and refrets. And I got to watch Chris Olson do a bunch of crazy stuff on a ES 175 that had been completely stripped. And he restored it and patched a bunch of holes in it and did an amazing job on the finish. So I got to get a little bit more like firsthand experience with that stuff.
So the guys that were the guys that were teaching at the school, all the instructors,
Yeah.
so they were doing their own work when they weren't teaching at the school, when they weren't holding class. They had their own work to catch up on at the facility. It wasn't like they disappeared to their own shops and you got to see it there.
Yeah, sometimes it was different. I only got to see what they were doing at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Olson, his wife would drive around Maricopa County and pick up guitars from a dozen music stores and bring them to his home shop. So that's generally where he did most of his work. But he did have a project or two that he had at the school that he was working on. And typically that was when he was dealing with doing finish work. So whereas John had his entire repair shop in a shed there. And he would just go in there and turn up the Grateful Dead and work away on something. And I would come in and plug my ears and watch him.
Very cool. So you get through the program and you graduate, and then what?
Yeah. So when I got out of school, I hadn't paid my car payment in 6 months. That's how poor I was. So I was kind of panicking. I needed to pay that as soon as I could before it got repossessed. I had the opportunity to go to an interview at Santa Cruz Guitars, and I had the opportunity to go to an interview at Collings, but I did not have the money to get to either of those places.
Oh, okay.
So it seemed like I was going to have to move back to Salt Lake. My family lives about 40 minutes out of Salt Lake. So I called my dad, who's a musician, and I said, hey, would you like to buy my orange Rockever 100 half stack? I'll sell it to you for $1,000. You wire me the money and I'll drive it to you. And he agreed to that because he likes big amplifiers. So I then started looking for jobs in Salt Lake. I started calling all the shops that were here. It was 2010, so there wasn't really, most of these places didn't have that much of a Facebook or Instagram presence, and I doubt I would have known to even hit them up that way if they had. So I was just cold calling places, asking if they needed someone, and absolutely no one was interested in hiring me. Wouldn't even have the conversation about anything that I knew how to do. So I finally just swallowed my pride and called Guitar Center. But back in those days, Guitar Centers functioned differently than they do now. You could be a luthier in a Guitar Center and be a separate company, and you essentially rented space from them. They would take 20% of your revenue as rent, and then you could kind of do whatever you wanted in there. And I happened to call the Salt Lake store at the right time, talk to the guy that was operating in there. He had a company called Guitar Technologies. And
so he was an independent. He was not employed at the store.
No, not at all. So I showed up. I once I got back in town, I drove over there and talked to him a little bit, and then he was like, "Where's your tools?" I was like, "I didn't know that I was gonna need to have them." And he's like, "Well, you better go get them." So I drove 45 minutes back to my parents' house, 45 minutes back to Salt Lake, and started that day. And that was late January 2010.
All right. So in 2010, you started working in a guitar center, slinging your tools, and you were what? Were you responsible for working on the inventory in the store and
Thankfully, no.
you were just
As that contracted separate company, you didn't. If they brought you something they were trying to sell, we'd make tweaks on stuff. That wasn't a problem. But if there was something damaged in the store, they would have that would actually have to go through our repair crew.
okay. So this was you were basically running a kiosk inside a guitar center.
That's actually a great word for it because that room was probably 12 by 8.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So this was retail repairs, people coming in off the street.
Yeah.
I broke my output jack. I need to set up. Snapped the
Yeah.
head off of this. And so was it like a full service repair thing where you're doing like, all sorts of repairs under the sun, or was it restricted to certain kinds of repairs?
I think that Gary, the owner, probably would have accepted anything under the sun, but there were just certain jobs that didn't go to a store like that. Like a neck reset wasn't going to go to Guitar Center
Right.
generally. But we did everything from fretwork, cracks, uh, small amounts of finish work, lots of routing modifications, lots and lots of broken headstocks. But the overwhelming majority of stuff that comes through a store like that was pretty simple.
So how long were you there in that position?
I was there for about a year and a half, and that's when Guitar Center changed their program so that now you had to be a Guitar Center employee rather than a separate company.
Right.
And uh, I used some very choice words to tell them that I was not interested in such a thing,
Okay.
and I struck out on my own for the first time.
So at that point, you just hung up your own shingle and decided to do
Yeah, I
your
just worked
own.
out of my house.
Okay. So you were Loothing out of the house, and how long did that last?
A couple, that really only lasted about 6 months because they ended up calling me and begging me to come back. It turns out the guy that they had replaced me with uh, was didn't have any business touching guitars at all. And I was friends with everyone that worked there, and so my friends were calling and begging me to come back
At
and
Guitar Center.
and actually work for Guitar Center, which I did, which was a terrible mistake.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Okay.
and I was there for I think about a year, and everything about it was awful. Uh, from the moment I showed up to the moment I left, everything about it was terrible. So
Oh, okay. So you hung out there for about a year, suffering through
yeah,
that. We don't have to go into all of the nitty-gritty details of that.
yeah,
Um, so after your experience there at Guitar Center, you went back out on your own after that, didn't you?
yeah. In 2013, I opened my first solo shop uh, in downtown Salt Lake. It was very exciting. Um, and it was a magical time. My first store of my own. I wasn't selling anything. I did have a few people that were coming and going teaching lessons,
Okay.
but it was exclusively a repair shop. I
Okay.
did build a couple guitars here and there for people, but
But it was
almost
mostly a service oriented,
absolutely. And
standalone shop, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, and it was this is one of the downsides of the way that I came up is that I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to learn from people that were a lot better than me. So I feel in a lot of ways it kind of took me a while to find my footing. And opening that store was kind of the first time that I took on some repairs and was able to get done with them and go, oh, wait a minute. I actually might know how to do some things on guitars,
Right.
and feel really, I did my first neck reset for a customer there. I'd done them on personal guitars, but uh, that was I had to reset the neck of an upright bass. Again, like one of these things that you take on when you're young and you're hungry. That
Right.
now, if someone walked that through the door, I would usher them out of the store as quickly as possible.
I don't think I've ever taken the neck off of a bass.
It was not a good time.
Yeah. I used to share a shop with a violin Looth who worked on violin, violas, cellos, basses.
Yeah,
And that stuff stayed on that side of the room.
how it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, Sharon used to rehair bows for him. But those are different animals altogether. I wouldn't even venture into that side of the pool.
Yeah. Again, it's I was young and hungry, so I was taking things on that I probably had no business taking on. I never found myself in a position where I was walking away from something going, "Oh, that couldn't have turned out worse."
So what I'm curious about is how that experience of actually opening your first, retail repair facility
Yeah.
that open to the public, anybody could walk in with any size, shape guitar or what have you. What that experience how that experience affected you in terms of loothing, in terms of your experience with doing that for the first time, as opposed to just manning a counter at Guitar Center.
Right. Yeah. Uh, in a million ways. I mean, from the aspect of running a business, which I had never done, like right out of the gate, that was just, it seemed like this insurmountable task. But being a one-man show, being able to sit down and see that it's not that much paperwork, definitely soothed my mind a little bit. But the actual process of doing repair, I found that it was way less stressful when there was no one else, gumming up the machinery of me doing guitar work. Everything was considerably easier. I mean, if you think about, like, we've talked about this before, just the act of someone bringing a guitar in to have it checked in for repair.
Mhm.
If I'm doing the check-in, then I'm going to take the time and make sure that I identify all the problems with the guitar. If someone else is doing the check-in, they're going to look at the guitar and go, "Oh yeah, you do have a crack right there," but they're not going to know whether that crack on the top is also indicative of a loose brace. They're not going to know if the top cracked because of an impact or because of lack of humidity. They're not going to take the time to figure that out. They've got guitars to sell. They've got other things to worry about. So I'd say that the biggest bonus of all of it was being able to be the one guy. The biggest downside all of it was being the one guy and feeling like it was me against the world. So it wasn't uncommon for me to work from 9 a.m. to 2 or 3 a.m, and then sleep in my shop and then get up and do it all again. I kept a little kit there so I could brush my teeth and clean up for the day. And I kept extra clothes there in case I had a late night. In preparation for this, I was looking through my Instagram feed and I found a photo of me at like 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve in my shop. And it's like, older me, if I could go back and slap younger me for that stuff, it's like, you're not actually doing yourself favors when you do that stuff.
Well, I think a lot of that has to be lived through to learn.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to tell you, this, that, or the other, and have it sink in. I think also the act of doing this for yourself for the first time, there's suddenly a realization that, you're responsible for everything. So when the customer comes in to a Guitar Center and they go up to the cash register and they pay them, and you get your whatever the mechanics of that transaction are taking place, suddenly it's up to you to have to figure out how to fill out bank deposit slips and keep track of who paid you and who hasn't, and then report all of that to the government and everything else. It suddenly becomes a a realization in the minutia of running a business for the first time as well. So how long was that shop open?
Unfortunately, that shop was only open for a year because the owners of the building sold it, and the people that bought it plans to tear it down and build an apartment building. So,
Oh,
and it came the afternoon after doing my paperwork and finding out that after the first year I had made a profit, which I didn't expect. Um, and so I was on a high. I was feeling real good about it. And about 2 hours later, they walked through the door and they're like, "Hey, you have to move out. We're tearing the place down."
oh no. So
Cool. Like it.
what did you wind up doing? Where did you wind up going?
So I worked out of my house for a little while. Some of you may know Aaron Jones over at Acoustic Music here in town. The guy that owned that place at the time got so sick of people coming in asking where my new shop was that he asked me to move in. So for a time, I was in the upstairs of Acoustic Music where Aaron is now,
Okay.
which was wonderful. It was a lovely experience. But I was also doing really crazy things like driving all around the valley, picking guitars up from customers so that I could do a pickup and drop off. I thought that would be attractive to people. I was also driving to other cities to work in music shops there. I'd show up for 1 day a week with a kit, work on what I could while I was there, take everything back to my shop, work on it throughout the week, and then take it back the following week.
So you were just hustling,
Oh yeah.
trying to keep your hands on as many things as possible. Why didn't what prevented you from opening up another space?
That shop that I had for was $400 a month.
Oh, okay.
Uh, at that time, there were a lot of those kinds of places that were getting torn down, and they were starting to build these apartment buildings that are now everywhere in Salt Lake. And retail space skyrocketed in value. So there were a few other times where I was able to find shops where I could have all of my woodworking machinery, but there was never another time that I found what could be a public-facing place that was affordable.
So you were back to Loothing into the house and driving places to pick up and drop off and doing all sorts of gunslinger type stuff in stores. And so when did that go? You at one point you started working for a place called Guitar Chimp? Is that what was Guitar Chimp?
Guitar Chimp, and
Other than
Guitar Chimp
a very questionable name for
yeah, you can check them out. They're the guitarchimp.com. They basically just are used brokers of guitars. So, but they primarily deal with high end, specifically high end Les Pauls, but a lot of collectible guitars, a lot of high value guitars, but not like high value guitars. I'm talking like the kind of attainable high value guitar that a lot of people lust after. That's up to $10,000, without being completely crazy. So they asked me to come in and just do setups on their Les Pauls initially, or whatever guitar they had coming in. And
so these were instruments that they were purchasing.
They were buying them used.
They were buying them used, fixing them up, flipping them, and selling them as a used guitar.
Yes, yeah, and it generally they were dealing in pretty high dollar, moderately high dollar stuff. So there usually wasn't much to be done on these guitars. It generally the guitar would come in. There was another guy who would take the strings off, clean the guitar, take some measurements of stuff, take some photos of stuff, put the strings back on, put everything back together, hand it to me, and I would just set the guitar up and then hand it off to the photographer, and he'd take photos of it. So I did that for a number of years, and as part of that, I also did like some demo videos for them on effect pedals, and then we had a short series where I showed how to do like little tips in Luthery that was called Just the Tips, and I think there's still maybe 2 of those up on YouTube. There used to be more, but I don't know why the rest of them aren't up anymore. But those Just the Tips videos are silly. I think the ones that are up now, there's one on like making a brass screw extractor to pull a screw out, and there's one on, how to use surgical tubing to not drive yourself crazy when you're rewiring a hollow body.
Right.
So pretty simple stuff.
Okay. So you were with Guitar Chimp and the getting back to the nature of the repairs there, you said most of the stuff coming in didn't need much. I think that's probably also indicative of the fact of their purchasing criteria. They were probably not really interested in buying stuff that were basket cases and needed a lot of work.
On occasion they would buy something else, like I did a neck reset on a 69 Gibson Birdland while I was there. I unfortunately had to do a refinish on a early 60s P bass that had just been massacred with latex paint. I did a few refinishes for them. I did a lot of refrets. Making nuts was not abnormal. Fret levels was not abnormal, but in general, it was pretty much, here, set up 25 Les Pauls in the next 6 hours.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
pretty easy to do.
Sure. Okay. So how long were you there? You were there for a good 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I was there from 2015, beginning of 2015 up until I even worked for him a little bit in 2020 and beginning of 2021.
Okay.
So I worked with Jerry for a long time that runs that place, and it's a very small. It's basically him and his wife, and then he hires a couple people to help him with shipping.
So it's like, is that like primarily like an online concern where it was?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep. No. He had no storefront. He did not want any average Joe walking in and saying, "Hey, I want to play that $10,000 guitar I've always dreamed about."
Right. Okay.
I'm interested in that.
So was that kind of a full-time thing, or were you also doing the freelance business?
I was doing both. Yeah.
Doing your own repairs.
Guitar Chimp could take up 25, 30 hours a week. But I, for a while, had this very bench in Guitar Chimp, and I was able to have customers come by, and it wasn't a problem. So, and I was still, occasionally pick guitars up, and then eventually, Guitar Czar asked me to move in and lend them a hand.
Okay, so that brings us to where we are today, and also where we are when you and I met.
Yeah.
So you had been doing some freelance stuff for Guitar Czar. And I found the store, or the concept of the store, a little bit unusual because it's not like a big, like, Guitar Center or Sam Ash or a big, it's not a big concern. It's a small or medium small mom and pop music store.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty small, and it was the same size. They were in the same building for about 30 years before they moved to this location.
Right.
And so they had just stayed this tiny little business for a long time.
And when they moved to this location, they didn't the store remained as small and the shop got big.
Well, initially the shop was in a little side room that was like 12 by 15, maybe. It's a pretty small little room. And there was a nail salon in this location, which is right next door. And when the nail salon shut down and moved out, they immediately jumped on it and said, "Oh yeah, we'll put the repair shop over here." They had initially planned to partner with another business that handled synthesizers that was going to rent some of the space from them, but COVID kind of put a stop to that.
Right. Okay. So the decision to have a fairly modest store with a 2,000 square foot repair department was by accident more than by pleasure.
Yes, pretty much by chance.
Yeah, because any retailer that's going to devote that size of their outfit to for repairs is has their percentage per square foot kind of upside down in terms of what's valuable, because the most valuable space is obviously your retail space.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. They, uh, it kind of just happened. Um, I think the reason that it happened the way it did is, the two guys that had run the repair department here in the past 30 years, one of them for about 14 years, and the other one before that, um, those guys were, you know, a they were pillars in the community. Uh, they weren't just the guy that did repair at the shop. They were extremely well-known people. They had been doing a good job in the valley for a long time. So although repair doesn't do nearly the dollar amount that sales does, uh, there's no question that the percentage of people that come in here for repair versus for sales is higher.
Well, I think
And
it does drive traffic. I think
yeah,
if you've got a high quality repair department in any store, I think it does drive traffic to the store that wouldn't otherwise go there. So that brings us to where we were when you and I met.
yeah,
Circumstances brought you to Guitar Czar. You were already there doing some freelance stuff,
yeah,
but you were hired as a gunslinger to come in and they just point and say, go fix those guitars, or they would assign
yeah,
you work, or you would be able to pick and choose whatever guitars you were working on. You had your corner of the bench. You could ignore everything else that was going on in the shop, and you just did your work, worked on a guitar, got paid for it, and left.
yeah. It was heaven. I mean, it was the dream, right? Because I had this endless supply of guitars, and the only thing that sometimes was grating about it was that occasionally I'd be like, "Gee, a setup would be nice,"
Mhm.
because typically it was anything that was big and structural. They'd be like, "Hey, you're gonna do this neck reset. You're gonna do this guitar that got dropped. You're gonna do, you know, this botched repair that someone tried to do on the weekend at home. You're gonna do,
Sure.
it was generally big structural stuff. Was generally what I was dealing.
Right. So you're somebody who had the skill set to come in and just go and just
Yeah,
there wasn't any explanation that had to take place.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
had my own tools as well.
Mhm. Oh, and you worked with your own tools. You worked in your own pace. That was good. We when we had a multiple Looth shop, we had employees and techs that would work for us, and they had their assigned things that they were doing. But occasionally, we would have a Looth come in who was like, the kind of Looth that I could just say, point and go do, and there was never a question of how you want it done. It was just, he
Yeah,
could go from the beginning to the end of the job without issues, and that was nice to have when it could be found. So what happened at that point? How did you? Because I want you to frame the picture for everybody of
yeah,
how you got to where you got to, which is the meat of this whole interview.
yeah. So a while before I took over, we had a pretty big backlog. At the time, we were probably a little over 200 guitars, and it was my predecessor, myself, and then there was an apprentice that was here, and they had hired on a this young guy Sebastian, who at the time they hired him was kind of a shop gopher. They taught him to do setups and a little bit of wiring, but he was generally kind of the shop gopher. And early in 2021, so many people there'd been such an influx of guitars, partly from COVID through 2020, that so many people were upset at the prospect of having to leave their guitar for 5 weeks. So people had been asking and asking and asking for some sort of appointment basis. So my predecessor set up uh, a an appointment queue. Someone could bring a guitar in. He would they'd make an appointment for them, and they'd say, okay, in 5 weeks you're going to get a phone call, and you can show up and drop your guitar off, and here's your ticket, and you can take your guitar with you. Well,
So
unfortunately,
he was scheduling future work done to be based on a calendar day, like bring your guitar
yeah,
April 9th, you can bring your guitar back for its refresh or whatever.
yeah, and that did not work at all, because basically what happened was, by saying to people, yeah, you're going to get a call in X amount of weeks, when your ticket would normally be coming up in the queue, we were behind. So that was going to get pushed back anyways, but people would just show up, and drop their guitar off and say,
Surprise,
well, I didn't
surprise,
have an appointment.
surprise.
So around
What a shock.
October,
Customers aren't compliant.
yeah,
Customers aren't
yeah,
cooperative.
they don't show up when you tell them to, and they show up when they're not supposed to, and they want everything all the time. So my predecessor had a great saying, which was, "The customer is always the customer." Um,
Which gets more people into more trouble than
yeah, yeah. So that, unbeknownst to me, because I wasn't really paying attention, because I was just off in the corner doing my thing, the tickets were piling up very quickly.
You were just whistling while you worked in the corner while this was all
Yeah.
going behind without you knowing it. Okay.
Yeah, just having a blast over there, getting to do all the fun stuff I wanted to do. And my predecessor was working harder and harder and harder. Now he had always worked extra hours, but now he was at the point of sometimes working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing what I did at my first shop, just absolutely pounding himself in the dirt, trying to get things done for people. And, he was a huge part of the community. So he understood, as we all do, that now his reputation is tied to that. So he
Right.
has to be here to try to keep things running smoothly. Well, things got kind of rocky because of how busy we were. It got very stressful. The apprentice, who was 21 years old, he was like, "Hey, this is cool, but I've never worked any other job, so I'm going to go work in a warehouse. I kind of want to just try something different."
Sure.
So that,
Amazon.com is calling.
yeah. So, and we were happy for him, because he's just the best dude ever. But with him gone, it now became 2 luthiers and a shop gopher. And so now my predecessor was working even more and more hours.
Right.
And I basically came in one day, and the owners wanted to have a meeting, and they sat everyone down, and they said, "Hey, so he's done. He's not going to work anymore. He's gonna come in at nights. He's gonna finish out what projects he's currently working on, and then he's not going to be here anymore. If this is all just too much, Moses, would you like to take control of this shop?" And I said, "No, of course not." Sounds like
Not really.
Yeah, it sounds like the worst possible situation that I could possibly be in, because I enjoyed working on my own. However, I was aware of the fact that if I said no,
You were probably out of a gig.
Yeah, that would mean that not only would I be out of a gig, but very possibly there would not be, for the first time in over 30 years, a repair person at Guitar Czar. And who knows how that would impact the business in general. And so I said, "Okay, I will take this job. I will take this terrible, terrible, terrible burden."
And this was like October of 21, right?
October 18th of 2021, a day that I will never forget. And
he was due to be gone by like the end of that calendar year.
Yeah, he actually ended up staying a little bit later into January to try to tie up a few extra things.
But we're talking about 10 weeks, 12 weeks in him, being around, and that was it.
And he was coming in and working nights.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't even want to be around anyone. He wanted to just be completely unencumbered and work on his stuff. So he came in and did that, and I sat down with our shop gopher, and I was like, "Hey, so your life is about to change drastically. You're going to have to learn a lot of things, and you're going to have to learn them really fast. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to be very patient. And I'm sorry if I'm ever an asshole, but that's probably going to happen, because I'm about to have a whole bunch of stress on me." And then we sat down and we turned to the computer and we looked up how many guitars we had in queue, and it was, I think the exact number was 449 tickets in queue.
Wow. 450 guitars in-house. And when you and I first talked, the stress that you were under because of it, and the condition of the shop, as well as the chaos that you found yourself in, to me was palpable. I mean, it was So if you could try to describe that, draw a word picture of what that felt
Yeah.
like at the time.
I was in a constant state of pure panic. I mean, I think we've all had days in the shop where you're working on something and you turn around and you see the thing that you were just working on. And then you're like, oh, I need to finish that. And so you start working on that and you've now forgotten that one. And then you turn around to grab a different tool and you realize, oh, I was also working on that. And then you look around you and that's what you see everywhere around you, right?
Right.
Yes, you are correct, Tom. That can be everywhere. So,
Well,
but
you're
it
also
was,
talking about 450 instruments. You're talking about
yeah, with
500 guitars.
with one guy, right? So it was, I mean, every night I went to bed panicking and thinking, just trying to think of anything I could think of that was like, I need to come up with some sort of solution, some sort uh of process that can help me get through all of these
Right.
things.
Because
And every,
you described to me that among those like 400 and some odd guitars, the nearly 500 guitars, that I mean, there were tickets there where you didn't even know why the guitar was dropped off,
yeah, oh yeah,
because when it came in, it was like somebody must have made a note somewhere about something about, there were guitars there that you couldn't identify who owned them. There
yeah.
were guitars there you couldn't identify why they were dropped off in the first place or who.
It's been a year, almost a year and a half. There are two cases that are here. We have no idea what guitar they go to. They didn't have tickets on them. They were just sitting in a pile. And we've nearly worked through that queue of very, very old instruments. In some cases, some of the guitars that I found that had tickets on them were, 6 years old. They'd been here for 6 years. And so it was,
So
you know,
you had tickets in the shop that were 6+ years old that they
yeah,
had been dropped off. Had they been
yeah,
worked on at that point, or were they just sitting?
some of them.
Some of them had been worked on and then put aside.
Yeah. And some of them
Okay.
had not. And there were various reasons for that. But that added this extra layer of panic for me because then it was like, oh, well, not only do I have 450 guitars to deal with, but there are a large number of them that have been here for a very long time. And I can only assume that their owners are not particularly happy that their guitars have been here for half a decade.
Right. Most aren't.
Yeah. So it was,
I mean,
every time,
I get stressed out if I can't find the guitar strap that the customer left in their guitar case and it gets separated from their guitar case. I don't know how you deal with that.
it was sheer panic. Every time I turned around and saw a guitar, that was kind of the first order of business was like, I pulled up our computer system and I scrolled all the way down to the oldest ticket and I looked at the ticket and then I went and found the guitar and then I called that customer and said, hey, I know your guitar's been here for 6 years. I know you probably expected it to be done by now. It's not, and and
It's not.
and you were quoted $100 for a guitar that was completely smashed, which is not an appropriate price. And so I'm calling you after 6 years to tell you that A, I want to find out if you want this guitar worked on, which I assume you do since it's here, and B, I want to give you a break on the price of what it's going to cost, but it is not going to be $100.
Right.
This entire shop would sink into oblivion if I honored all of those prices, and I would
Right.
be stuck here forever. Thankfully, there were a number of tickets that ended up being duplicates. There were maybe a dozen or more tickets that were for guitars that had been picked up, that had some tiny little thing done on them that they didn't even get charged for.
But that'll send you into a panic as well because you got a ticket for a guitar that you can't possibly find. And
Oh, yeah.
who wants to pick up the customer and go, do you have that guitar or do I?
Yes. Yes. And in fact, just to bring it back to that entire appointment thing, I can't tell you how many times we'd call a customer and say, hey, your appointment is here. And people would go, I dropped that guitar off with you. And we would go, no, you didn't. You took it with you. We have it in our computer that you took it with you. And they would insist they left it here. So we would all panic, stop working, and absolutely go through every single case in the shop, which sometimes was 200 guitars, just to make sure it wasn't hidden in some other case only to find that, yeah, your guitar's not here. And then the customer would panic and say that the guitar was lost, only to sheepishly show up and say, "Oh yeah, sorry, it was in a case in the corner. I didn't even think to look in there."
Sure.
We should
So,
get
so,
it right.
so we can show everybody what you were dealing with. I'm going to share my screen here because you sent me some
Yeah,
pictures of what life looked like in October of 21.
yeah, and
Let's
I
see here.
think
Okay. So this here is, do I have
yeah,
this?
that's one
Do you
wall.
see that? That's
Yeah.
that's one wall of guitars that you had in queue.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's let me see if I can figure out how to do this. How to switch. Oops. Oops, I just unshared it. How did I do that?
Yeah. So one of the things
Right.
about these photos that you're going to show is, we the first thing I did when I took over was close the shop for I think a week. I no repairs in, no repairs out, and all we did was clean. And I believe these photos are from after we cleaned.
This is
Um,
too cleaned.
yeah. So although it's a little disheveled, it's a fraction of what it had been. Um, it was for as chaotic as our queue of guitars was. The state of the shop was just as chaotic because we had, everyone was panicking trying to get guitars done, and we just didn't have enough hands on deck to be able to do anything. And so every moment was always dedicated to doing the work as opposed to doing any cleaning.
And this was another wall of pictures that we have here.
Yeah.
Why can't yeah, let me see if I can get this
I
exploded.
wish I could help you, but I'm an unintentional Luddite.
Yeah, I just part of it is just the Zoom is in my way for some reason.
But yeah, so we spent that first week and a half or so just cleaning and moving stuff around and trying to get an idea of what we were dealing with the queue. As I said, there was probably about a dozen tickets that were duplicates or for guitars that weren't here, which yes, added a ton of stress for me because I wasn't sure if something had been lost.
Rick, you want to send me those pictures and I'll share them.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do there we go. I'm just trying to figure out to get my
Sorry to jump in, Moses. I just
No, you're good. Thanks for your help.
if you run into a snag, email them to me and I'll share them on my end.
I can't email them from this computer, unfortunately.
But yeah. It was a terrible time. And pretty much at the end of every day, at the beginning of every day, me and Sebastian would walk in and look around and just go, "Oh shit, oh shit, I can't believe this is our lives." And
Well,
then at the end of every day, we would look around and go, "Did we do any good today?"
can I, Doug, while you're messing with that, can I jump in and ask a couple of
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely.
So you had, and while you were doing that, the cat that had gotten the shop to that state was still in there plugging away on his handful of projects he was trying to finish out.
Yeah, he was in here. The shop's closed Sunday, so he would come in Sunday day, but he was generally here as soon as the store closed. He would show up and he would work until the wee hours of the morning, and then he'd go home. So he was still putting in a lot of hours. He just could not handle the dealing with customers. All he wanted to do was just get the jobs done and kind of wash his hands of it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting spot. I'm not sure I would do my best work when I'd just been fired though. Like, was there any issue with that?
He wasn't fired. It was his decision.
Oh, okay. He was just making
he
was making an egress.
Yeah, he called the owner and said, I can't do this anymore. So which, is understandable. He was working himself to death, to be fair. And I'm glad he got out for his own sake.
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to try this one more time. Hang on a second. There we go. That's more like it. So here we are at that wall. Here we are at that wall of guitars.
Yeah.
That was all of the stuff in queue waiting to come out.
That was all waiting to get picked up.
That was all
No,
waiting
this
to be worked on.
all waiting to be worked on. Everything you've seen so far is waiting to be worked on.
So, did you have any kind of like triage procedures for this? Did you go through maybe based on value of the instrument and say these guys should be called first, or did you just start at the beginning and work your way through?
And what do we got?
Yeah, here's real quick. This is what the floors looked like everywhere in the shop, as far as
Oh
just
no.
piles and piles and piles and piles and piles of guitars. And this room, is 80 feet long, and there would be a row of 2 or 3 rows of guitars that went from about the halfway point to the other end.
I mean, you've even got guitars stacked up in the corner over there.
Yeah.
When customers were dropping guitars off, did they see this before they dropped it off? Did they ever look at that pile and go, say, I can't help but notice you have a pile of guitars here. What are the chances I get my guitar back anytime soon?
Yeah. In fact, pretty much every single person that walks through the doors would look around and go, whoa, you guys are busy, huh?
Uh-huh.
Trying to put it in the nicest way they could.
Uh-huh.
And, it also didn't escape anyone's attention that there were cases here that were under half an inch of dust. Like, well, how long has that guitar been sitting here? Do I have to wait for that guy to be done?
Well, this is the next picture that comes up, and this is the one that gave me PTSD.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
that was the one that gave me PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, look at those benches.
Yeah.
Not good. There's not a good place to work in that photo. It it was not a great time in my life, for sure.
Well, you had more than one Stu Mac vice, thankfully, because
well, just wait till I give you the tour.
It looks like it was set up with good intentions. Like you've got a lot of good walkway and good ability to get around the benches and stuff. It just looks like there wasn't enough space to put everything away, or maybe people just weren't putting stuff away.
I mean, to be fair, there was almost zero shelf space. There were virtually no drawers anywhere to put anything in. So there was just things would just get piled, and that's what happens when you don't have any organization. It just every flat surface becomes an area for you to put the thing that you're not currently using.
Plus, it seems like you were doing nothing but putting out fires at the time.
Yes.
Nobody ever says they've got a system of organization called the pile system.
Yeah.
Nobody ever says that.
To Ian's earlier question, yes, there was basically a triage of looking through stuff and going like, okay, what is the fastest thing that we can get a bunch of stuff out very quickly? So going through a bunch of the tickets, again, still dealing with 430 tickets or so, finding that man, there were guitars here for a tuner swap.
Well, here's a couple of clean benches.
Yeah, so that was more after I had kind of taken over and got a second drawer unit and
got some toolboxes.
Got a couple of shelves, yeah. So things were a little bit better at that point. So we were able to go through and get a bunch of these little things out of the way. The Plek is still here, yes. We were able to get a bunch of the little stuff out of the way and clear out a good probably 60 guitars that none of them needed anything more than 15 minutes of time. So it was also very easy to go to my shop, Sebastian, who had been the shop gopher, and be like, okay, you know how to do setups, you know how to do wiring work. I'm going to have you swap this tuner. It may not fit. So pull the tuner out. Let me know when you're ready. I'll bring the tools over, or here's the tools you're going to need for this. And then I'm going to come over. I'm going to do it in front of you. You can see it. And then when you're ready to try that on your own, you can try that on your own. So we very slowly started to claw our way out. And thankfully, I put the word out like, hey, we are looking to hire someone if there's anyone out there that wants to come and lend a hand. I also messaged tons of people that I went to school with and people that I knew. I messaged Nate Wood. I messaged like everyone. And of course, everyone was going like, this is terrible. Like, why would I want anything to do with this situation? It sounds like the worst possible situation. And it was. So I bless all their hearts. I was never disappointed whenever someone said they weren't interested, because I never expected anyone to be.
Sure. So about a month after you took over, you and I spoke on the phone. We had, if I remember correctly, it was a good 3-hour phone call, if not longer, where we were kind of trying to wade through all of the issues that you were dealing with.
Yeah.
And I'm going to rely on your memory rather than mine.
I have my notes from that conversation.
So walk us through that conversation and what kind of path that conversation went through, and what cul-de-sacs you went into and all of that.
After I described the situation I was in, you described this shop as a Rubik's Cube. You were like, there are so many moving parts that you have to be able to move around and figure out what the correct combination is going to be able to even move forward. We identified all the individual problems, like how obviously the backlog was kind of the number one thing that was the issue.
Yeah, that was the big elephant in the room.
Yeah,
I remember using the old saw, saying that, ask you the question, how do you eat an elephant?
Right.
One bite at a time. So that was the that's the only way you can cope with that. But you had to come up with a set of criteria by which you were going to wade through 450 guitars.
Yes. Yeah. And that's essentially what we did. We just figured out a list of what to attack first. I also, after we started going through some of the easier stuff, I called all of these guitars that had been here for 5+ years and said to people, do you want this repaired? And I was surprised at how many of them were like, oh man, I forgot about that guitar 5 years ago. So no, I don't want it. Some people came and picked them up, but most of them were like, just throw it away. I don't care. It wasn't a valuable guitar in the first place.
So those were fortunate phone calls. And you also had the benefit at that time of being able to call and say, hey, look, I've just become captain of the ship.
Yeah.
And we're trying to rectify the situation here. So you started off with a different relationship with the customer than, the guy who forgot about your guitar 5 years ago. So you had that going for you. And I think we discussed that at the time as well. So go back to your notes and continue going through that.
Another huge component of our conversation was the pricing for repairs here was
ridiculous.
Atrocious, I think is probably the appropriate word. Many of the prices had not been raised in a very, very long time. Some of them had been raised fairly recently, but they had gone up by very small incremental amounts. So at your direction, I did what everyone should do, which was I didn't pay attention to anything that I had ever charged for any service I had ever done. And instead, I just looked at what all of the costs were of running this shop and what that came out to per hour and how much we needed or wanted to make on top of that. And that included the overhead of the rent of the shop. It included my pay. It included Sebastian's pay. It included the average amount of materials that are purchased per month. It included everything. Everything that we had to spend money on went into that equation, and figured out that, okay, well, we are going to have to, at minimum, to break even, we would have to charge $61.32 per hour of work.
You got it right down to the penny. Wow.
Yes. And the amount that we were charging as our shop rate was $60 an hour. So if we were firing on all cylinders, that meant we were still losing $1.32 an hour for every hour.
Yeah.
So we were in a losing game long before. So that was kind of the first thing. We raised that hourly rate up.
Let me ask you a question about that. At that point, did you sit down with the owners of the store and say, and have this conversation with them about, or were you just given, permission to steer the ship as you saw fit?
They gave me permission to steer the ship as I saw fit. However, I'm the type of person that I wanted to make sure they were included in,
Right.
because they're very smart people. It's a father and son that own the shop. The son basically runs the shop, and the father helps whenever he's needed. But basically, I would sit them down as often as I could and just say, okay, here's the next thing that I'm going to do that's going to be completely alien to you. And most of the time they were just like, whatever you think is going to work, go ahead and do it. Like any way we can support you, we will support you. Because they were also in panic mode.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was important for you to have them understand what your process was. So they didn't, just say, well, if we ever lose Moses, we have to start at square one again.
Yeah, and on top of that, me being intentional about including them in the conversations also built a really good relationship between me and them that, if we need to have hard conversations, it's easy for either of us to sit down and just go, okay, so here's a thing we need to talk about that one of us is panicking about at this given time.
Plus, I think that gives you also a sense of trust between you and them, where when you come to them and say, hey, this needs to happen, they can look at, they'll have more trust in saying, you know what, if you feel it needs to happen, then just do it, because everything, including them in the process of making all of those changes. Because I know music store owners who, if their repair guy comes to them and says, you know what, we got to start charging a lot more for repairs, they'll go into panic mode, saying, well, then we'll lose all our customers and nobody will ever bring a guitar here again. And we're charging $50 for a setup, and, at most it can go to 55, and, all of this kind of thing, where, you come walking in and say, well, you know what, from setups from here on out are going to 150.
I pulled all of the sales guys aside and said, hey, I know setups were $50 forever here. And I know that recently, a year and a half before, they went up to 60. I'm about to raise them to 80. And I know that you guys are probably going to have to hear a lot of complaining and a lot of questions from people, but that is the price that we are charging. Mm-hmm. And we are comfortable with that price. And we feel like people get their money's worth out of that $80. Yes, there are other places in town that charge $20 for setups, and they can go ahead and continue to do that. And all it will do is hurt the profession as a whole. But what we're going to do...
well, if those people keep doing $20 setups, sooner or later, they're going to be out of business. Because what I think it is something that shouldn't get lost on people during the conversation, is that with all of us, there's a cost providing this service to a customer. There's a cost that's involved, and every shop is different. The size of the shop, the number of people, all of that has an impact on what your charge ultimately winds up being, or how much it costs you as an individual, or the shop as a whole, or a music store to provide the service. But if it's costing you, like you said, $62 an hour, or $61.32 an hour to provide a service that you're charging $60 for, then something has to subsidize that activity. Yeah. And it's either coming from out of the sales department, and, you don't realize you're losing money by subsidizing your repair department, or it gets subsidized when the moving van pulls up and takes everything away.
And that's exactly what was happening. Was the sales side had been subsidizing this repair side since it moved into this side of the building, because again, it's a very large footprint for a repair shop. So yeah, we basically ended up raising prices about 40% on a lot of things. We have a Plek machine here. It is a Plek Pro, and A refret used to cost $325. It costs $650 now. And guess what?
Awesome.
Guess how many less refrets we do?
Zero. Right.
People still want it, and now it covers our costs.
Right.
So where previously it was we were hemorrhaging money so that people could have a better playing guitar. And I'm happy for those people having better playing guitars, but that this business can only exist for so long if that's the model.
Right. Okay. So go back to the conversation. What else?
Yeah.
What else did we talk about?
Yeah. So the growth of the shop, as we were looking into how it was going to have to grow, because it was going to need to grow very rapidly. That also had to be factored into the hourly rate. And so that was an additional thing that we put in there that I did mention that was just like extremely important in like, okay, well, what's this going to be down the road? So the next thing that we really talked about was putting a possible cap on guitars. One of the things you mentioned was at first you were like, well, and hilariously, this is the question that got me into this line of work when I went into my friend's amplifier shop. You posed the question, okay, well, if you lock the doors and you do nothing but work on guitars in the backlog, how long is it going to take you to get through this stuff? And I think my answer was about 2.5 years, probably.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
There were some huge jobs in here.
And you're not, just to be clear, you are not through to the other side of that equation yet. You're not through that backlog. You're a good portion of the way, but you've still got some of that backlog that you're still.
Yeah. And I actually have numbers of that I'll read a little bit later.
Okay.
Of those older guitars. One of the things that doing that triage, like Ian brought up, one of the things that we discussed was like, how can we get certain setups or certain jobs done faster? And in the past, I had done this thing at my old shops where I did setups every Saturday. So no matter what day you dropped your guitar off during the week, it would be done on Saturday, which is obviously very attractive to people, knowing that they could drop a guitar off on Thursday or Friday, get it done Saturday. While my general queue for stuff would just be longer. And I found that I got a ton of positive feedback from people that could get setups very quickly and know that they could get setups very quickly. B, that helped my reputation because although my general queue was actually several weeks long, everyone in town thought that my turnaround time was a couple of days. And it was never a couple of days unless you were getting a setup. And, by separating those things out, it also gave me the opportunity to sit down and just do a setup once in a while, which, the longer you're in this game, it seems like the less you get to do the super easy, fun setups where you to actually just sit and work on a guitar and then play it and then get it out and then go to the next one and you get that instant gratification.
You get to chalk up a quick, easy win and move,
So what I did at that time was I went back to implementing that setup. Setups are done now, and this is still how it is generally every Friday, Saturday. So people will drop stuff off during the week. It's always done Friday and Saturday. Now people are getting used to that. It used to be that, maybe we'd get 10 setups a week. Now it's not uncommon for us to get 20 setups a week. And I got enough guys in the shop now that I'm able to blow through that stuff pretty easily. The next thing that we had to talk about, well, let me go back to the possibly capping the number of guitars.
Yeah.
Initially, I just said we are not accepting any repairs for the foreseeable future. While I dug my way through that queue, by the time I got to the end of November, we were down to about 300 guitars because so many of those jobs were actually pretty small jobs that could get through pretty quickly. And also a lot of the people that had appointments for 8 months that had never been called about bringing their guitar in ended up getting it fixed somewhere else and not needing to bring it in. So I was able to kind of delete some guitars out of the queue that way. So down to 300 by December was pretty nice. And at that point, I had brought one of my guys on. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the having that queue a little bit lower, I then started to open things up to say, okay, we will accept setups and we will accept wiring work, but we're not accepting anything else. And this has kind of been the model that I have slowly worked through since then. We're still not at the point of where I'm accepting, say, neck resets, because currently I'm the only person that can do them, and I have a lot of other things to deal with. So
Right.
slowly, as everyone in the shop gets trained, I open up a little bit more of what I allow. So for a brief time, I actually had like 5 different queues. I had a setup queue, I had a nut and saddle queue, I had an electronics queue, I had a finish queue, and I had a structural repair queue. And that way I could tell people like, okay, you are qualified to take stuff from these piles. If you don't know how to do that job, grab one from one of the other piles and let me know, and I'll hand that ticket to someone else, or I will show you how to do it.
Right.
And so that at least created a path for me to slowly start to work through things while slowly teaching people some stuff.
Mhm.
So that was wonderful. One of the biggest issues with the backlog was that we were constantly doing the kind of the squeaky wheel thing.
Yep.
The customer that's constantly calling you wanting to know if their guitar is done, a lot of people are gonna tend to just like go focus on that guitar. And that is how this shop functioned for a long time, because our backlog was so huge. Whoever called up screaming was more likely to get thrown to the front of the line, just so that we could get that guitar out and make that person happy. And
Or at least get them to stop screaming.
yeah, and that was a big thing, is you said explicitly, like, no squeaky wheel repair.
Yeah.
Things will be done in the order that we get to them, and
Yeah. In our shop, squeaky wheels get replaced with wheels that don't squeak.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that as soon as I stopped taking care of any squeaky wheels just vanished. Like people were aware that if they called and raised hell, they might be more likely to get their guitar done. So why do I want to reward that behavior when instead I could curb that behavior? So generally anything that we were waiting for approval on, whether the customer wanted approval on, you said, let's just consider it as a done guitar. If we've been waiting for the customer to get back to us on whether they actually want a nut on this guitar for 5 years, how about the guitar is done and I no longer have to store it anymore? And that was a wonderful, wonderful suggestion. And again, this was another instance where I was able to call people and say, hey, we've been waiting for your approval on this, but we can't wait any longer. We just need you to come pick it up because it's in our way. And again, a lot of people were like, oh, sorry, I forgot that guitar existed because it's been there for so long.
And the people who said, the people who you'd call and say, we're waiting for your approval and we're tired of waiting so you can come pick it up. If the conversation went the way of, well, I really did want you to work on that. Sorry, I forgot about it, but I'd like to give you my approval. Then you had the opportunity of saying, well, okay, well, this, your start date is now. Yeah. It's not 3 years old. It's 1 day old. They immediately went back to the back of the queue.
That helped considerably. And then I think probably the biggest thing that I have in my notes that helped me at that time was, don't be afraid to turn away the repairs that were underquoted.
Mm-hmm.
And that was generally the way that most luthiers I've dealt with in this valley, the way that they operate is like, they're coming from a place of understanding and integrity and wanting to make sure that the deal they make with the customer is the deal they keep. And I think this is something that we all try to extol. But it was scary to call someone up and say, hey, I know we've had your guitar for 6 years and I know you were quoted $100 to replace the back, but that's not how much that costs. And so, like, if you want the back replaced, you need to come pick your guitar up, because I'm not going to charge you that amount. I am capable of doing that, and here's what I charge for it. And I know it sucks to get a phone call after this many years and be told, hey, you know that thing that you were told was going to be $100 and take 3 weeks? Well, it's actually going to be $1,200 and take 5 years because of how long you've been waiting. That was hard, and I had a lot of very upset people, and I had a lot of people that were very rude and very threatening, and I never gave an inch on that, though. It was, this is what it costs. I'm sorry, but this is what it costs. Well, why was I quoted that before? I don't know. I'm not the one that quoted you that, so I can't answer that question for you. But if I could, I would. And I can only tell you what I charge and how long it's going to take me. And there were an awful lot of people that were understanding about that. So
Yeah, I think having that ability to say, well, hey, look, I'm just the new sheriff in town. I don't know what happened in that conversation with whoever you had the conversation with. And in reality, looking back at it, you can only surmise that if somebody was, for whatever reason, had severely underquoted a job that never got touched, one of the reasons why it probably wound up in the lost and found pile is that when it came up, somebody didn't want to start pulling out a guitar for $100.
yeah,
I probably should have never quoted that. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but it's easier to just push it back in the queue and pretend it wasn't there, and then move on to the next guitar, especially if you have 450 other guitars to move on to.
yes, yeah. There's no shortage of broken guitars in this valley. So
Sure. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So and another thing you brought up at that time was it's okay to not quote a turnaround time.
Mhm.
It's okay to tell people I don't know, and I cannot tell you how many times I have said that to people now in the last year and a half. People will call and say, hey, like I just want an idea of when this is going to be done. And what I do is first thing I say is, this is going to sound like I'm making excuses, but I just want to make you aware of the situation that I am currently in.
Mm-hmm.
This is how long my backlog is. This is how many guitars have been in here longer than your guitar. This is how many people I have working for me. This is how many guitars we get done on an average week. Here are the limitations of my shop. Here are my limitations of time, of materials, of skill, of any limitation that I need to tell them. I would be upfront and explain that to people. And generally, once I explain all of that, people are generally more shell shocked than anything. Just like, oh wow, okay, yeah, just call me when you get to it. There of course were a few people that were still not particularly nice about it, and would press really hard to get a turnaround time. And I would tell them, look, I'd love to give you a turnaround time, but at any given moment, something is going to catch on fire. And I'm the guy that puts that fire out. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to put that fire out. So
Mm-hmm.
I cannot answer that question for you. If you want that answered, you are welcome to take your guitar somewhere else. There are a lot of other really great luthiers in town that I trust and recommend. And I will be happy to give you their address and phone number and the name of their shop, and you can head over there, and I will call them and let them know you're coming, and they will help you out. And in general, people didn't take guitars.
Okay.
In general, people were understanding and said, okay, well, as long as they knew, this is the thing that I think a lot of people have experienced, that if you're working on a guitar for a long time and you've surpassed that date that you told the customer a guitar was going to be done by, don't worry about the customer being mad. Just call them and say, hey, this is where I'm at in the repair. I estimate it'll be this much longer, but that is an estimate. And 9 times out of 10, customers are going to be thankful that you called. And you have to remember that the customers generally hold luthiers in higher regard. So they're going to be more likely to be like, wow, they called me. I'm special now.
Yeah. Plus being, giving them a heads up when there's difficulty, for the most part. Occasionally there are those people who just don't understand and never will.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you get to them first, rather than, say, oh, it'll be done by April, and then they haven't heard from you by May, June, July.
Yeah.
They're left wondering for months, going, well, just, I wonder where it's going with him. And if you
Yeah.
head him off at the pass, and especially in the situation you were in, like I said, you had the ability to be able to call him up and say, hey, this is the setting we now find ourselves in. There's a new cast, and we're moving on. So let's talk about people.
Yeah. I love my guys. So
But before you go there, this is
Yeah.
also, this whole experience was your first experience managing other people.
I had managed other people in previous jobs,
Okay.
but never in the Looth room. I
Okay.
had occasionally had, someone that I had as like an apprentice here and there,
Mhm.
but never more than one person.
Okay.
And long before I took over the shop, I had conversations with the guy that used to run it about like, hey, we have a gigantic backlog. We are not getting through it in a timely manner. The number of guitars in queue is only increasing; it's not decreasing. We should hire someone. And I understand his hesitance for that, because that may be another person that he has to train, and that's less time that he actually spends on working on guitars.
Right.
So I understand why you could have the viewpoint of hiring someone is not something that will help us.
Right.
But in the long run, it was pretty clear that that was not going to be the case. So in November of 2021, a couple weeks after I had taken over, we had put the word out, and this guy, Sean Stafford, showed up. He was a retired former FBI agent who had been doing parts casters for years. And he showed up and said, hey, I heard you're looking for someone. I would love the opportunity. So I brought him in, and what I did with him became the template for what I did with everyone else that I hired,
Mhm.
which was I brought them in for a couple days and said, look, I'd love to hire you, but I can't just bring you in and have you work on a customer's guitar without any understanding of where your skill level is at. So here are a bunch of my personal guitars. I'm going to have you set some of them up. I'm going to have you do fretwork. I'm going to have you make a nut. I'm going to have you do various things to these guitars. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. But if you're not cool with sitting here working on my guitars for free for 3 days, I understand that. But I have a duty to the customers that I have to make sure that I'm protecting their instruments. Sean came in, and he did setups and wiring work, and that was about it. Taught him how to make a nut. A couple weeks later, a young guy named Christopher Hartman came in, who has done a ton of stagehand work in town. He had done, setups and wiring work on the side for people for a while, and he was looking for a better version of that, where he wasn't having to do things out of his recording studio that he ran. So he wanted to have a bench somewhere. So I brought those two guys on, and was trying to slowly show them how to do more things.
I think those were the two guys you had when you and I spoke, correct?
Yeah. Yep. And then I had a young guy named Mike Turnwall show up shortly after that. Mike actually just recently went to the Gallup School up in Michigan for a couple months. When he came, he was very much in the same boat. He knew how to do a little bit of soldering. He knew how to do a little bit of setup work. But in general, what I did with these guys when I was bringing them in, it wasn't just a, hey, go set this guitar up. I would give them a piece of paper, and I would say, here is the target measurement for where I want the high E and the low E at whatever fret I'm having them measure it on that specific guitar.
Mhm.
Here is he does a good job sharpening, Tom. I gave them numbers of how much I wanted the gap to be at the first fret. I gave them numbers on everything that I could, how much relief I wanted, how much everything. And I gave it to them in order so that they could follow a formula to get the guitar set up. And then once they thought they had it, they'd bring it to me and I'd double check all the measurements. And if something was off, I'd say, take this back. I need you, this is a little high, this is a little low. And it was partly an exercise in seeing how they could work on a guitar, but it was mostly an exercise on, if I give you a number, can you go hit that?
Mm-hmm.
Because that tells me so much more about what your abilities are than your ability to actually set the guitar up. That tells me that if I send you to a sander and I say, hey, here's a nut blank, I need you to get this to 130 thou, I need to see that you can bring it back at 130 thou. And that tells me a lot about what your hand skills are, what your understanding of how to sand something and polish it out and get to a final measurement. There were all these little things that I wanted. And a lot of that came from when I was at Looth school at Roberto Venn. You know, they were giving you all of this information on like different types of glues and memorizing caliper measurements and, you know, a lot of things that to many people probably seemed like they weren't really that important. But as you got into the industry, you found that, oh man, if you know those shorthands, if you know what glue reacts with certain oils, then you know what glue to use on certain jobs. If you know what glue has a better shear strength versus a tensile strength, then you know when to use it in certain applications. So I don't have to sit you down and say, okay, so in this application, we want to use this because of this. It's much better for you to just know the groundwork there. So I was trying to find a way to be able to give that to my guys and say, look, I'm constantly turning around and going, okay, I need a 5/64 drill bit to drill this. What is that in caliper measurements? And, you know, there's plenty of guys that just kind of panic and sit there and think about it and try to figure out what that is. And it's just, I tell them all the time, you have no idea how much faster you are going to get at this job if you can just do those in your head without thinking. So I had those three guys, and then Sebastian, who I had been with me since the beginning. And by the time we got around to April 1st, we were down around the 200 mark.
Okay.
Which was amazing. At this point, I was still not accepting any structural repair whatsoever. No finish work. Basically just nuts, saddles, setups, electronics, and, you know, tuner swaps, hardware swaps, stuff like that. Occasional routing jobs. Taught the guys how to do some routing and, you know, but in general, it was fairly simple stuff. At that time, though, I had noticed that we had kind of hit that 200 point and we were just kind of staying right there.
Why was that?
And it was just the capabilities of where everyone was, my capability to teach people. We were getting a lot of the setups done and a lot of the wiring work done, but we were not getting any of the stuff that was in that structural repair queue, which was entirely on me. We were getting very little of that done because I was not only running the shop and ordering parts and figuring out all of the little pieces and parts of the day.
So while you whittled your way from about 450 down to 200, you pretty much were coasting on that 200 for a while because you were keeping up with what was coming in.
Yes.
But you stopped chipping away at those bigger jobs.
Those bigger jobs were going through, but they were just moving at the pace of molasses.
Right.
You know, I just had too many other things to do. So I had an idea. Well, sure, I could just go hire a couple more people, but how much of my problems is that really going to fix? So my plan was I was going to hire 2 more guys. I was going to train them to do setups, nuts and saddles, and electronics work. And then everyone else I was going to train up to do other things.
I remember you talked about that.
I knew full well that as soon as I brought 2 more people on, that would mean that I wasn't going to work for 2 months. I was going to just be answering questions for 2 months. Because now not only did I have my 4 guys that were still in the early stages of learning, but I also was going to have 2 people who were walking in to a whole new world. So again, I did the kind of audition thing. Probably had in about half a dozen, maybe 10 people come in and do auditions, and I picked the 2 best ones and gave them the jobs, and that paid dividends because those guys came in and they were immediately on top of setups and immediately on top of wiring work. One of them, Sean Jurwitz, also does pinball machine repair. So he's already incredibly mechanically inclined, already very familiar with all sorts of wiring. And then the other one, Aiden Woodward, super good at specifically bass guitar stuff. He's an incredible musician. Both those guys just had a great eye for detail, could follow what I was throwing at them. So I was able to have those guys jump in, and I started to try to push these other guys towards learning more and more. But to the surprise of no one, I didn't have enough time to really push those guys towards learning a bunch more stuff. So now I was kind of in this second limbo of going, okay, we're getting a lot of stuff out. By July, we had managed to get down to around 150 guitars, but again, we were kind of just stuck at that level. And so I started showing people how to do more structural stuff, how to do, little things here and there when I had the time, but it just was not going as fast as I wanted it to. And so much of my time was taken up because all of these guys were on piece rate. I didn't feel comfortable having any of them doing anything dealing with customers. I didn't feel comfortable having any of them ordering parts or running to the store, doing any of that. They were all on piece rate. So I wanted them to be able to work. I'm a union man. I know the value of labor. So I was like, as long as you guys are at your benches working, if you need anything, you ask me for it, I'll get it for you, which took my entire time away. So I had to do the super scary thing of going to the owners and saying, hey, this repair shop that's been an absolute nightmare for a while and hemorrhaged money for a long time. I'm about to ask you to put every one of my guys on an hourly rate and just hemorrhage a little bit more money. But I will be able to take time out of every single day to pull them from their benches and show them how to do something.
Yeah, because if they're getting paid per piece, they're worried about, their concern is, how many nuts and saddles they're making at the bench, how many guitars they're setting up, how many rewires they're done, how many pieces are crossing their bench, because the more they get on and off their bench in a given day, the more money they're going to make.
Yeah. We call it the money square. If you get out of the money square, then you make no money. So you have to stay in the money square. And I think that most retail store owners, if you approach them and said, hey, you have a department that is bleeding and we would like it to hemorrhage, but down the road, things will be better. I think most retail store owners would say, take a hike. No, that's a terrible business plan. And I think that it shows the heart that the guys that own this place have and the way they care about people that work here. They said, okay, we are going to put ourselves in a terrible position for the next 6 months. We're going to let you just train people for a few months. And so since beginning of November now, every day there's something to show everyone. Some days that is, I'll show you the rest of the shop here in a second. You can see how far it's come. But some days that's pulling a guitar, putting it on one of the demo benches here in the middle of the room, and pulling out whatever tools I need and go, okay, so this is how we fix a brace, this is how we fix a crack, this is how we remove a bridge plate.
So you spend a portion of every day with your crew skill building.
Yes, and now another thing, once they got to a certain point where I was comfortable doing this, now I was able to go into my crazy backlog and hand pick out some tickets that I thought met certain people's skill level and go hand them out to those people and say, okay, you're going to pull this out. You're going to look at it. Here's the tools you're going to need. Here's what measurements I need. I want you to set it on the demo bench, get those tools ready, get the materials ready, and then let me know when you're ready. I'll come over. I'll look everything over. And then as soon as we're ready to work, I will call everyone. Everyone will turn around, bring their notebooks over, sit down, take notes. I'll explain it. And then I'll have you do it in front of them, or I'll help you do it in front of them, so that essentially I'm running a repair shop and a school at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
On certain guitars where I'm comfortable with this happening, I allow them to not only gain the learning experience from doing the new job, but also the actual working experience with having to do it on a customer guitar. Obviously, I'm not going to throw anything at them that I have any concerns about, because you never want to practice on a customer's guitar. But with my guiding hand there, that helps considerably. I'm able to essentially have 6 apprentices.
Sure. So, but while you're doing all of these skill building exercises, you've got crash dummies for people to work on.
Yes.
While they're learning that.
Yeah, I have. So I have customer guitars for certain things. I have a ton of loaner guitars that I have had the absolute wonderful luxury. I cannot tell you how good it feels after being in the industry for a while, of just going around and punching these guitars and breaking bracelets loose. They're loaner guitars that people gave to us, and cracking stuff intentionally. I was teaching them headstock breaks, and I got to just spend a morning breaking headstocks. One of the most enjoyable days of my career, to just sit there with a clamp and clamp them to a table until the headstocks broke. It was a blast. And so I have a ton of loaner guitars that I can say, if I need to do a crack repair or teach them how to, level a little bit of finish. Okay, well, I'll just take this and drop it on the floor, and here you go. Now you have to fix it. And sometimes when those guitars are kind of done and don't really have anything else that they need done to them, because they're just $100 cheap loaner guitars, occasionally I'll reward these guys by letting them take it out in the parking lot and turn it into kindling.
Mm-hmm.
That's very exciting to watch someone do and to do yourself. And it's always hilarious to see how tentative they are to do it, because they spend all day, every day doing everything they can not to put a blemish in anything.
Sure.
So by the time we got to the beginning of this year, even though I had now spent 2 months training, we got down to about 100 guitars.
Oh, awesome.
Which was incredible. January was tough though. I got COVID. A couple of my guys got sick with other stuff. People were out of town for various reasons. Right now, at this moment in time, our queue is 152 guitars.
So those are guitars that came in recently for
general.
Yeah.
100 of those guitars, the actual number is 100, have come in since January 1st.
Okay.
So the majority of those are fairly simple jobs. Right now, when I got COVID, when I left, we had 120 guitars in queue. When I came back, we had 150. So it was like 30 guitars came in the week I was gone.
But to put those numbers in perspective, if your current backlog right now is 150, or your current queue is 150 guitars, and 100 guitars came in January, that means of your original 450, you're down to 50.
It's actually less than that, because of the fact that the guitars that came in 2022, in all of 2022, there's 28 of those.
Okay.
So that means that everything up to the point where I took over has been whittled down to about 16 guitars, a little over a dozen.
So of your original 450, there's only 16 left.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's
it's remarkable.
Yeah.
There are days where I look at those numbers and I look at them over and over and over again, because I'm certain there's a mistake somewhere. But that's where we sit. And I feel so lucky to be where I'm at. It's still extremely stressful. It's still, I have days when I'm teaching people, and now we do all of our customer check-ins back here so that I can get my guys familiar with that process, as well as create the community for these guys so that they are interfacing with customers. They are building relationships with customers to create just a better community with all the players in town. But there are days where I leave work and I go, I talked for 8 hours straight today. And I had a vocal injury a few years back, and that prospect of talking for 8 hours a day is terrifying to me.
Mhm.
But it's really, I feel really lucky to be in the position that I'm at with the guys that I have, because uh, whether they actually respect me or not, I'm not sure, but they certainly they respect the craft, and they show up every day and they want to know more things. There have been times where I've tried to show one person just, oh, real quick, let me show you how to do this, and I'll turn around to walk away from it, and there's two people with notebooks just like trying to key into the
Mhm.
conversation, only to find that it's something that they've already been taught. Um, it's I feel so lucky. Yes, I did the work to pick those people, but in the case of Sean and Chris and Mike, and those guys just walked through the door. They were a warm body, and that's what I needed. Sebastian, man, that kid was a shop gopher. I mean, he did setups, he did wiring work, but he didn't really know, a crowning file from a fret cutter when I took over, and that kid has saved my life. I went on tour with my band last October. We were gone for a month. We were in Europe and the Northwest. And when I got back, the first person I ran into was the manager of the sales side. And I just said, "How did it go?" And he was like, "Your guys are amazing." Like we had no problems. The
Wow.
only problem that happened was the Plec machine went down.
Okay.
But my guys were fine. So, uh, I mean, that just warms my heart every day to know that, like, I can count on these guys. And the constant concern that I had was, how do you know what the limit of the number of guitars that are going to come through the door is? When I went to hire those last two guys, it was like, and I mentioned it to everyone, they were like, "Is there enough work for that?" And I was like, anytime I say, okay, our turnaround time is now 2 weeks instead of 3 weeks, or a week and a half instead of 2 weeks, the number of guitars that comes through the doors skyrockets.
Mhm.
We get super busy really quickly. And that tells me that the capabilities of housing guitars is more of a problem of there being enough guitars for us to work on.
Right.
We've had 200 plus guitars in this room before I took over. So I know that there's at least that many guitars out in the valley. But that was a terrifying thing, reaching that point of going, can I hire someone? Can I bring someone on? Can I train this person? Do I have the patience for it? Do I have the infrastructure for it? Do I have the client base for it?
Mhm.
And thankfully, the answer to all of those has been a resounding yes. And it seems to me, right now, I was gone for a week and didn't have the opportunity to raise what our queue was. And when I came back, 30 guitars had come
Mhm.
after being gone for a little over a week. So those guitars are out there. And if you call Aaron over at Acoustic Music, he's got a ton of work. If you
Yeah.
call Joe's Guitars at Mid Valley Guitar Gallery, if you call Justin over there, he's got a ton of work. Everyone is constantly looking to have more help. So I know that there's more guitars to get at. I'm not planning on hiring anyone. In fact, we had a very well qualified young man walk through the door a couple days ago looking for a job, and I looked around the room and I looked at the number of guitars and I thought, what bench can I put this guy at? Because we could use the help. And I had to temper myself and say, do
Yeah.
I have time to train yet another person? And
That brings me to a question. When you talk the owners into going from a piecework payment system to paying salary,
yeah,
I know it's probably scary for the owners. It was probably scary to ask. I think I already know the answer to the question, but have you noticed that there has been or hasn't been an effect in terms of productivity? I suspect that while the numbers per hour, for everybody's salaries adds up now to more than $61.
oh yes.
How has that affected the volume going in and out of the shop?
So The interesting thing has been that since everyone went on hourly, I'll touch on this first. Since everyone went on hourly, I have found that our productivity did not go down,
That's awesome.
which is very interesting because I'm taking up a little bit of everyone's day every single day, showing them how to do things, and yet we're not making less money. And that's partly because they're being trained how to do other jobs.
That are bringing you more money, sure.
But I think ultimately what that comes down to is that they're building all of these little skills that I'm talking about, the knowing caliper measurements and, you know, being able to look at something and go, that looks like it's 10 thou too big. Those skills are being built up. And despite the fact that they may not be aware of it, if you can do that when you're making a saddle, then when you're doing a setup, you can also do that with the height of a string.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need to pull my ruler out to see that something is at 4/64ths. I do it anyways, but I can do a rough setup on a guitar without any measuring devices and get into the ballpark before I then go through with measuring devices.
Yeah, and you wind up being a quicker Looth as a result.
Yeah.
And that also reminds me of part of our original conversation where we were talking about people. Was I remember how obsessed you were, if I'll put it that way,
Yes.
with
Yeah.
the Fleck machine.
Yeah.
Because you
So,
had interrupted me at least half a dozen, 10 to 10 times or so, saying, I think what I really need to do is just pull one of these guys, train them on the Plek, and just like have a Plek only guy. And I got to a point of the conversation where I said, will you stop talking about the Plek?
yeah. And in fact, the one thing that you said that really flipped the switch in my mind was, who are you going to hire to run the belt sander?
Yeah.
And I was like, why would I hire someone to run the belt sander? And you were like, why would you hire someone to run one tool? Makes no sense. Why don't you just train everyone on how to use that tool? Okay. And the reason, to make clear to everyone, the reason that I had come to that was this gives some insight into the panicked mind that I had. I had a shop that was hemorrhaging guitars and hemorrhaging money. And if I had someone that I was comfortable with, that I knew could handle it, that I could throw on the Plek machine, the owners had done the math before they bought the Plek machine. If the Plek machine is able to run all day, every day, and someone is manning it and running it and getting guitars done, that can completely subsidize the entire repair side of this business. That can pay for everything on the repair side on its own. So when they came to me and were like, hey, might be a good idea, because we did the numbers, if you had someone doing that, that would really save things financially. And I was able to go, okay, yeah, that would save things financially. And that would also get a lot of guitars out. And so it became this thing I hyper focused on of like, if I do this one thing, then it could be the solution. And thank God you talked me out of that, because I
think if you had gone that route, you would still have over 400 guitars in the house.
Probably.
Because the only thing you would be getting done was Plek jobs.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it would have it. And now, you know, every one of my guys knows how to at least cut a nut on the Plek. Many of them know how to do fretwork on the Plek. And another great aspect of this is the more minds you're able to get on anything. That's what's amazing about like this entire Patreon channel. Is the more minds you get on something, the more likely you are to find a suitable solution to it. And so while I had, you know, my own way of like, this is how we polish frets when we're done with the Plek, one of my guys pulled me aside one day and was like, hey, I think we can skip this step. And I was like, show it to me. I'm not going to tell you no, but show it to me. Show me how you do it. And I watched him do it. And sure enough, it was like, yeah, we got a step we can skip now. So now, because I put someone who a year before, if you had put him in front of a Plek machine, he wouldn't have been able to find the start button. Now that person was giving me insight on how I could streamline a process. And by getting more minds on it, it made everything go a little bit faster.
Cool. Very cool.
So, you wanna tour the shop?
Yeah, let's take a look around because I'm anxious to see the transformation of this place. Because I still have
Yeah.
PTSD from that first picture.
Yeah. So back in the day when people used to show up here, when they would walk in and see those piles of guitars, their first reaction would usually be a gasp and, oh, wow, you guys are super busy. This doesn't look good. Now, every time someone walks through this curtain, they are like, holy shit, I had no idea that this was going on behind this. So let me turn this camera around, and then as soon as I figured out how to turn a camera around, again, I am not intentionally a Luddite. I am just accidentally one.
There we go.
When
Look
someone
at
comes,
that.
this is what they see. Right here, we've got our check-in bench. Right behind that are the shelves. On this unit right here, we've taken a ton of time to figure out a good way to organize all of our parts, all of our materials. We've got little holders on top. We've got these drawer systems around the entire side. They're all dedicated for specific things. They're all labeled for specific things, and stuff is generally in an area of, here's electronic stuff, here is bone materials, here are strap buttons. Everything's pretty well laid out that way. As you can see, our shelves are completely full, and all of the tickets are very easy to see. We recently,
turn around for just a second. Turn around behind you. So this is your dedicated setup. This is your dedicated intake bench.
Yes, this is our check-in bench. We've got a computer here. We got an amp down here so we can plug everything in. We have a few supplies and some polish rags right here so that, if we need to do something right on the bench real quick, we can just go ahead and do that. However, we try to keep that free because we are a high volume enough shop that we really need to be able to constantly put something there. So I brought in this secondary bench, which we call the restring bench. As you can see, we got some books under there. We've got all of our sandpaper is laid out by what grit it is and separated. We've got our restring bench right here, and then over here on this rack, a bunch of supplies. But generally, a guitar will come in on the check-in bench. We'll be able to enter everything on the computer, do our entire check-in process. With the amps down there, we can always, if someone comes in and they're having an issue, they say it's, a pickup is cutting out, we can plug it in right there and right in front of them, see if it works or not.
And I noticed you've got like the movie place ropes there, so you can see.
Yeah.
Does that how many people violate that?
As long as the sales guys remember to close it, no one walks past there. But the sales guys virtually never remember to close it. So on an average day, there's usually one or two people that walk through it. But my bench is immediately right next to this bench. So I see every customer that comes in, and I can immediately turn and grab them.
Okay.
So one of the things about our shelving here that I want to touch on is we recently changed this. They are actually organized by the type of case they're in. In the past, we've tried things by organizing the type of job. We've tried a bunch of different things, but now we have all of our rectangular hard cases up here, all of our gig bags right here, and all of our acoustic hard cases along this bottom row and up this side. All of our dung guitars belong to generally these three shelves right here, so that they're closest to the computer so someone can grab it, take it right out.
So when a customer comes to pick up a guitar, where are they retrieving it from?
Right here.
They're coming back into the repair shop to retrieve it from you guys.
Yeah, we want to be able to have the conversation with the customer. We will read them notes that we enter in of all the things that were done to the guitar. Frequently, if that person is in the shop, I will grab them and have them come and check out that customer so that the customer gets used to dealing with that particular luthier.
Okay.
So all of this, let me show you the whole room real quick.
And for them to sit and play it, that's where they sit and play it when they pick it up and that kind of thing?
Actually, we have a demo room in the back of the store over on the sales side where people can sit down and test stuff out.
Okay.
So here's the actual benches side of the room.
Okay.
That looks
Yeah.
really nice, by the way.
Thank you. It's definitely taken a long time to get here. We've got 4 benches on this side where a few fellows work. We have 3 benches on this side. I'm first. Sebastian, my right-hand man, is next to that, and then Sean after that.
And he's actually on your right.
Yes, indeed. He also loves being there because he hates talking to customers. So that's I'm a buffer for him.
Let's take a quick look at your bench setup.
Yeah. So I like to refer to this as my spaceship.
Mhm.
I have this amazing thing that I don't exactly recall where I got it, but I've got the 2 lights that are on it, as well as a place to plug everything in. I have all sorts of fun things on here that people have stuck to my bench over time. This is one of my favorites. You can see stupid tuners on 3 times, enter 2 times. That's how you tune a Gibson with robot tuners. And there's, a bunch of my tools. It's not very clean.
Before we go any further, just glance over to where the customer area is.
Yes.
That obviously was a change. How different is that from the customer experience was before you took over?
Night and day.
Okay.
Night and day. My predecessor was very close to the check-in bench, but the cleanliness of the shop was considerably different, as you saw in the photo.
Right.
So, people walked in and they saw guitars getting worked on in a shop that was pretty suspect. So it's a big change. It's also really nice having my bench here because if I'm doing a larger repair on a vintage instrument, the luxury that I have is people will come in and see the crazy thing that I'm doing rather than necessarily just a setup. And so then it gives people this extra insight of, oh, this is what this shop is capable of. They can do more than just restring my guitar, which I brought it in. So we also have these couple of benches here in the middle. These are generally our demo benches. There are some supplies underneath them. We've got a ton of nut files laid out here on magnetic strips on the side so that everyone knows where those are. Although a lot of these guys, they actually have their own nut files. And this was my building bench. This is where I used to always build guitars. And now it serves the purpose of being a demo bench.
No, when you say demo bench, that means those are the benches that you're teaching at.
Yes, this one specifically. I've worked at this bench for so long. I've had it for such a long time. I'm very comfortable with it, so it's easy for me, and it's also fairly central. Everyone can come over here, and
sure.
And if sales guys walk through, it's they're not going to interrupt what we're doing. So if I'm doing a demo, I'll always run out and tell the sales guys, "Hey, doing a demo. Don't let anyone back there. Give us 15 minutes or so." So our 3 toolboxes with all of our various hand tools in them. There are a few power tools in there, but in general, it's mostly hand tools. This drawer unit, we have this shelf right here, a number of things on there, mostly just supplies. This is actually currently empty because once we reorganized our all of our parts, we no longer had a need for this. Except we've got some saddles and some cleat stock sitting over here. The next big organization thing is these shelves. It's mostly pickups, tuning machines, but there are a few tools down lower, as you can see. And if anyone wants to know about how to do an ovation neck reset, don't bother. In the middle of that as well. Various supplies over here. We've got this back wall over here with tons of guitars hanging up, tons of parts over here as well.
These guitars all on the back there, those are work in progress.
Yes, most of these, if they're not work in progress, surprisingly, a number of people bring guitars in without cases.
Oh, boy.
A number of these are also loaner guitars that have been are the kind of training guitars that these guys have worked on.
Yep, crash dummies. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah. So all sorts of things around here. Most of these are guitars that came in without cases, but some of them are in fact being worked on. Some of them are the loaner guitars. And then of course, other side of the room, we've got a bunch of tuning machines that could go on slat wall, and then our big old Captain Placard, as we like to call it. So, and we thoroughly enjoy the use of this thing. So, yeah, and then at the back of the shop, the screen does work. The whole thing works, in fact. This is where things get weird. We have some of my power tools here. So drill press, bandsaw, thickness sander, disc sander, benchtop sander, a little thickness sander drill press back there, oscillating spindle sander, router table, edge sander, dust collector, and then finish supplies back here.
Okay.
So this is where all the dust making happens, basically. Eventually, the back half of this shop is actually going to be walled off, cleaned out. We're going to put a spray booth back here. That's our old spray booth. If anyone wants to buy a spray booth, we'll sell it to you at a good price. Great spray booth. It just doesn't really suit our needs. And most of my building machinery is actually behind all of that stuff. There's currently not adequate electricity in here to run any of that stuff, so it's just kind of piled up until they begin construction and turn this place into a nice spot. And then here's the mess that the sales guys make of all the stuff they're trying to sell.
Oh, so you get some like overflow storage from the sales department.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we just move their stuff around just to mess with them.
Well, a suggestion I would make,
Yes.
when you go to put up walls for the for the spray area in the back,
Yeah.
they could put up a couple of extra walls and a doorway to give the sales guys their own little room. Just where you can keep them away from you.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I would love that. So there is going to be a big wall that's going to go up right here over to this side. There will be a doorway for them to come through to their stuff, and then there will be a doorway that comes into the repair shop.
Sure, yeah. And if you just box off their room and give them their own room to walk into, one, it keeps the dust off of whatever they're trying to unbox and sell, but two, it gives you two walls to hang stuff on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, this is impressive. This is a fabulous job, because this doesn't even look anywhere near what the pictures of the old shop.
Yeah, for one, there's no guitars on the floor. that means everything. That's the kind of the big deal for me, because I did not want to have a bunch of guitars just sitting on the floor all over the shop every time I turned around, something to trip on, something for customers to see collecting dust. There's a million reasons.
So let me ask you another question as it relates to people.
Yeah.
You talked about moving people from piecework onto salary. When you did that, did you rerun your numbers in terms of what your cost of service is with that change?
Yes.
Okay.
And we just have not raised the prices yet as a result of that. That'll be coming in about today's the 5th, so probably at the end of this month.
Okay.
And many of those prices, thankfully, the way that you instructed me to do my pricing, there are some prices that are going to stay the same.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And surprisingly, there's enough getting done that we're feeling pretty good about where we're at. We're still going to increase prices on a lot of repairs. And that doesn't bother me at all. And the interesting thing about raising our prices was that I expected to get a lot more people upset about it. In truth, our setups went up $20 from 60 to 80. And we probably had, over the course of over a year, maybe a dozen people.
Yeah, but by the same token, you can't even buy 4 dozen eggs for that at current prices.
Yeah. So they don't seem to really care. And then especially when you get into the bigger stuff, like a refret or a neck reset or something large, people want quality, and they're willing to pay for quality. And that doesn't mean that my quality is inherently greater than anyone else in town simply because of the price. But the work of our shop is fairly well known, and we feel comfortable paying that price.
Have you noticed, like you mentioned earlier, your refit price went from 3 to 6 or in that neighborhood?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that changed the quality of the guitar getting frets put in it? In other words, did that price out a fair amount of guitars from getting refrets?
Surprisingly, no.
Okay.
Surprisingly, we actually do more refrets than we used to. We probably don't see as many inexpensive guitars for refrets, but the reality is, like, I have often found that generally when someone brings in a less expensive guitar for a refret, even if they're quoted $300, a lot of times they just go, well, it'll be my slide guitar now. I really have not noticed a large change in the type of guitar that comes through as a result of that. But I definitely, after raising the price, see way more vintage guitars.
Okay.
So that's interesting.
So I've been monopolizing your time now for a little bit over 2 hours. I want to open it up to see if anybody else has any questions.
Yes, this is. I'll tell you what. I've been very excited to have people ask me questions because, as I said earlier, the more minds I get on something, the better. I don't have the best mind, so I'd love to hear anyone else's opinion or suggestion. So please share.
Hey Moses, what point of sale are you using at your intake bench there?
It used to be called Rain. It's now called Music Shop 360. Very, very creative name. It actually works pretty well. There are a few things about it that are a little bit annoying, but in general, it does a really good job. So,
is it spitting out tickets and tags for your cases?
Yes.
Okay, cool. What is there, like a laser scanner or anything that goes along with it, or is it all just so you can go and scan scan the ass into the case and get a readout of what it is?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's a pretty good system. That's what they use on the sales side here as well. Apparently enough music shops had been using it when it was called Rain that they decided to change the name to Music Shop 360. So
cool.
I don't know why.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great system. I like it.
Anybody else, if they got any questions, just unmute and give us a shout.
Hey, Moses.
Yes.
Just curious how you came down to the penny on your hourly rate.
Yeah.
Doug has often said he's a numbers guy. I am totally the opposite.
Aaron, are you a letters guy?
It makes my head hurt. So
I found out how much the rent is, right? And then I divided that by how many square foot the repair shop takes over.
Okay.
I went and got an average of what the expenditures per month are, and I you know, took that average and added that to the total. I added what my wage is. I added what Sebastian's wage is. I added what the average electrical bill is. I just added everything that the shop ever pays for. I added all of that together, and basically divided it by the number of hours that the shop is open per month.
Okay.
And that way I knew how much needed to be made per hour in order for it to be profitable.
Right on.
Which is how it got it down to a penny. So
I do think I think there still is a spreadsheet up on the Patreon that will get you that pretty much that close.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when I did that business talk for Ian, I think they posted. I wrote a spreadsheet that will let you input numbers, and it'll, you have to make some decisions about hours and stuff like that, but it'll get you pretty close to the penny, and you just only have to put in a few numbers, and you'll get to your expense ratio pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check that out.
I highly recommend that absolutely everyone do that. Even if you already know what it is, do it again. It's super valuable. I think it's something that I'll probably do every single year.
It's eye-opening. It's eye-opening for sure. Well, I want to say, Moses, you've done an incredible job turning that place around. In follow-ups that we've had since we initially talked, you keep saying things like, well, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're down to this, we're down to that. But I got to say, if you've gone from a 450 guitar backlog down to what is essentially 16 from that original backlog, you're a lot more done than you're giving yourself credit for. You're a lot further to that other side than I even thought you were at our most recent conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I will feel good about it once all of those super long backlog guitars are done, and a lot of them are super close. That horrible Ovation neck reset is one of them, and I do think that there's one project in here that's a refinish, but right now I don't have access to our spray booth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when that's going to get done, that right there on its own is going to make me feel a million times better. So, sure. But we are pretty much there, and we're at a point now where I can look at the future without thinking as much about the past.
Mm-hmm. So what does the future look like? What's coming next?
The big thing for me is being able to expand who is doing what job. Ultimately, to me, us having made it completely through is I'm not the only one that can do a neck reset. I'm not the only one that can do a refinish. That to me is the end. Once this place has people in it that can accomplish the things that I can accomplish, at least to some degree,
mm-hmm.
To a degree that we're comfortable with sending out the door. To me, that's when the success will be. Not that means I'm going to walk out the door, but if it were at the point where I know that when I walk out the door, the next guy that's in charge doesn't have to go, shit, what am I going to do with these 450 guitars that are in queue?
Right.
That for me that's having truly won this game.
Well, like I said, I think you've done a remarkable job at turning around something that I might have even considered throwing a match over my shoulder as I walked out the door. So yeah, I really want to thank you for spending the time with us today and walking us through the process you've been through, because you've done a fabulous job.
Thank you.
Everybody.